morning, everyone. Today we are going to talk about ED endings. As you know, we have 3 different ways to pronounce the ED endings of past tense verbs, t, d, and id. Now, first, we need to think about syllables. Syllables are the number of sounds in a word. Many words have only 1 or 2 syllables, but definitely some have more. Why is this important? Well, this is important because the id ending adds a new syllable. It adds a new sound onto the end of a word. But the t and d endings do not add a new syllable. Also, the id ending is the least common simple past sound. This means the t and d endings are much more common. So, how do you tell if you pronounce an ed verb with t, d, or id? Well, the id ending is the least common, but it is the easiest to identify. So, if the verb ends with the letter T, like the verb want, or if it ends with the letter D, like the verb need, then you add id. And when you say it, you need to add another syllable. So you say wanted. So want, wanted. Need, needed. If the verb ends in the sound of T, like celebrate, or the sound of D, like decide, then you add id. And when you say it, you add another syllable. So celebrate becomes celebrated. Decide becomes decided. But remember, this is the least common form. T and d are much more common. So, how do we know if we mean t or d? Well, to recognize if you need a t or d ending, you need to listen to the last sound in the verb. Notice I said listen to the last sound, because sometimes the last sound is different from the last letter. So we listen for the last sound in the verb, and then we need to decide if that last sound is voiced or voiceless. Now you might say, what? How do I do that? It's okay. Let me explain. If a sound is voiced, your vocal cords, right in here, they vibrate. This means you can feel, when you touch your throat, you can feel something. So if you go, ah, and you touch here, ah, you feel it. If a sound is voiceless, you don't feel anything. It's like if you go, nothing. So that's what we're looking for. Do you feel something? That's voiced. You don't feel anything? That's voiceless. Now remember, we're only listening or feeling for the last sound, not the whole word. So let's practice. Let's take a look at this list of sounds. This list of sounds, these are some voiceless sounds. So take your hand and put it here. And let's make these sounds together. Say, sh, sh, ch, ch, s, 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 s. You shouldn't feel any vibration. That's because those sounds are voiceless. Now, if a word ends in a voiceless sound, you add t, and you don't add a new syllable. So let's take a look at this list of words. All of these words end in a voiceless sound. So we have help, help. Help becomes helped. Help, helped. Look becomes looked. Look, looked. Sniff, sniff. That's sniff. Sniff, sniff becomes sniffed. Sniff, sniffed. Wash, wash. Wash becomes washed. Wash, washed. Watch, watch becomes watched. Watch, watched. Dress, dress becomes dressed. Dress, dressed. And fix, fix becomes fixed. Fix, fixed. Now let's move on to the voiced sounds. Let's take a look at this list of sounds that are voiced. So again, take your hand, put your hand on your throat, and let's make these sounds. Ooh, z, b, e. You should feel the vibration on your hand when you do that. That's because these are all voiced sounds. So, if a word ends in a voiced sound, you need to add the d ending. But again, we don't add a new syllable. So let's take a look at this list of words. These words all end in voiced sounds. So we have call, which ends in that voiced ol sound. Call becomes called. Call, called. Still one syllable. Clean, clean becomes cleaned. Clean, cleaned. Offer, offer becomes offered. Love, love becomes loved. Use, notice use has the letter S. This is why I said don't look at the letter, listen for the sound. Because it sounds, when we say it, like a Z. We say use. It sounds like Z. So use becomes used. Still one syllable. Use, used. Rob becomes robbed. warm becomes warmed. Or study, 2 syllables in that one. Study becomes studied. I guess offer became offered. All right. So the biggest and most important thing to remember here is that we don't add an extra syllable to a word that ends in the t or d ending. So if it ends with the t or d sound, you don't add an extra syllable, but you must add that extra syllable, to words that end in the id ending. Okay, I hope this was helpful. Bye-bye, everybody.